It is a highly specific, deeply profound phenomenon that almost every single truly anointed chosen one has experienced at least once in their life. Pause. You are sleeping deeply in the absolute middle of the night, perhaps completely exhausted from a heavy week of spiritual warfare, when suddenly, your eyes just snap open. Pause. There is absolutely no defining noise. Pause. There is no loud crash outside your window, and there is no sudden violent movement in your house. Pause. The absolute only reason you woke up is because of an incredibly distinct, intensely undeniable feeling resting entirely on your chest. Pause. You woke up precisely because you felt the heavy, penetrating weight of someone explicitly staring directly at you in the dark. Pause. As human beings, we are biologically fully wired to instantly recognize when we are being watched. Pause. Our nervous system is incredibly sensitive to the invisible atmospheric pressure of a steady gaze. Pause. Your very first natural instinct in this exact moment is usually absolute terror. Pause. Normally, waking up to the distinct realization that you are not entirely alone in the darkness immediately triggers a massive wave of biological panic. Pause. Your mind starts racing, desperately trying to aggressively scan the heavy shadows of the room to identify the unseen intruder. Pause. You instinctively assume that the hidden eyes piercing through the dark belong to an enemy. Pause. Pause. But then, something incredibly mysterious and profoundly beautiful happens that completely intensely short-circuits your normal human reaction. Pause. As you carefully open your eyes and blindly stare into the quiet darkness of your bedroom, you suddenly realize that the atmosphere is not terrifying at all. Pause. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. Pause. Instead of feeling the cold, deeply oppressive chill of demonic surveillance, the entire room feels uncharacteristically warm, heavily insulated, and incredibly safe. Pause. It feels exactly as if someone has just gently draped a massive, impossibly heavy blanket of pure peace directly over your spirit. Pause. You still feel the undeniable weight of the gaze. Pause. You still absolutely fundamentally know that you are being closely watched by an unseen presence. Pause. But the strict terror you expected to feel is entirely missing. Pause. The quiet air in the room is not tense or heavily anxious. It is thick, incredibly rich, and dripping with an overwhelming sense of profound affection. Pause. The invisible eyes that are currently locked heavily onto you are not hostile, aggressive, or maliciously condemning. Pause. They are deeply tender. Pause. You are actively laying there in the dark, bathed in a thick, heavy silence that somehow makes you perfectly feel completely understood, fully protected, and wildly loved. Pause. The heavy darkness around your mattress has miraculously transformed into an impenetrable fortress of pure safety. Pause. Pause. This incredible paradox creates a massive, deeply beautiful conflict within your own body. Pause. Your logical brain is fully conditioned by society and horror movies to absolutely panic. Pause. Your incredibly analytical mind desperately wants to trigger a massive biological fear response, actively telling you to violently sit up, quickly turn on the bright lamp, and furiously inspect every dark corner of the room. Pause. But your activated spirit violently simply refuses to obey. Pause. Deep down in your absolute core, your profoundly sensitive spiritual radar is actively overriding your natural human survival instincts. Pause. Your spirit explicitly recognizes the unique, holy signature of the presence standing quietly near your bed. Pause. Unlike a monitoring spirit that specifically aggressively seeks to inject toxic anxiety into your veins, this specific presence is actively drawing all the heavy stress completely out of your exhausted body. Pause. You realize that you have absolutely no desire to turn on the light. Pause. You don't want to move a single muscle, because moving might aggressively disrupt the incredibly sacred, heavily peaceful atmosphere that has completely saturated the room. Pause. You are deeply confused, but wildly comforted. Pause. Your logical mind asks, "Who is staring at me in the dark?" But your spirit already miraculously deeply knows you are absolutely, perfectly, eternally, incredibly safe. You are resting directly under the incredibly watchful, massively protective gaze of someone who entirely, absolutely adores you. Pause. Pause. Before we dive into the massive scriptural revelation behind this exact experience, I need to fundamentally reassure your heavily exhausted mind. Pause. As a deeply anointed chosen one, you have been thoroughly trained to view the midnight hour as an active, highly dangerous spiritual battlefield. Pause. You have spent countless difficult nights rebuking heavy demonic assignments, aggressively breaking generational curses, and fiercely battling the dark entities that attempt to violently disrupt your crucial sleep. Pause. Because of this massive historical trauma, your natural automatic assumption is that every single 3 a.m. awakening is a direct demonic attack. Pause. You have been heavily conditioned to believe that if something invisible is operating inside your bedroom, it must inherently be a dark spiritual agent looking to severely exploit a hidden vulnerability. Pause. But you need to radically, fundamentally shift your perspective right now. Pause. While spiritual warfare is undeniably, absolutely real, it is not the only supernatural activity happening inside your specific house. Pause. The kingdom of light is equally, if not more, actively, completely engaged in your midnight hours. Pause. You must completely, brutally stop automatically giving the enemy absolute credit for every single supernatural encounter that heavily, explicitly occurs in the dark. Pause. Your bedroom is not just a frequent battleground. It is primarily a highly protected sanctuary established and fiercely, heavily guarded by God. Pause. Pause. If it wasn't a monitoring spirit trying to actively steal your peace, what exactly produced that incredibly intense, deeply specific feeling of being watched? Pause. The profoundly beautiful truth is that you spiritually registered the immense, incredibly heavy atmosphere of divine intercession. Pause. You did not wake up because the local kingdom of darkness had successfully breached your spiritual, heavily fortified perimeter. Pause. You woke up precisely because the incredibly dense, profoundly affectionate presence of God was actively moving directly beside your bed. Pause. Your spirit is a hypersensitive divine instrument. Pause. When an entity is actively praying for you with massive, insurmountable, pure spiritual passion, that intense spiritual energy literally changes the tangible density of the air in your room. Pause. The feeling of eyes aggressively resting on you wasn't the cold, calculating, deeply malicious stare of a spiritual spy trying to illegally map out your emotional weaknesses. Pause. It was the profoundly warm, intensely protective, deeply loving intercessory gaze of heaven, entirely focused firmly on your restoration. Pause. You physically felt the actual, literal weight of heaven's highest authority completely covering you while you were entirely unconscious. Pause. Your spirit woke up simply because it recognized the absolutely magnificent, brilliantly holy signature of the Good Shepherd, faithfully watching over his fiercely, intensely, heavily loved sheep. Pause. The heavy gaze you explicitly felt was the purest expression of absolute divine eternal love. Pause. Pause. The profound realization of this truth possesses the massive power to completely heal your relationship with the night. Pause. By the absolute end of this video, I definitively promise you that your entire spiritual paradigm regarding the dark hours is going to radically, physically, beautifully shift. Pause. You are going to stop violently anticipating warfare every single time you close your heavily exhausted eyes. Pause. We are going to deeply, profoundly decode the specific, magnificent scriptures that mathematically perfectly explain exactly who was staring at you, entirely why they were staring at you, and precisely what massive spiritual negotiations were actively taking place on your behalf while you slept. Pause. You will absolutely finally understand why that incredibly heavy, deeply overwhelming blanket of peace felt so radically, undeniably tangible. Pause. You will suddenly officially realize that you are never, ever completely alone when the lights go out. Pause. The absolute next time you suddenly quietly open your eyes at 3 in the morning and explicitly feel that intense gaze, you are not going to frantically jump up and desperately start aggressively binding demons. Pause. You are going to smile perfectly in the dark, close your heavy eyes, and explicitly, peacefully, completely surrender entirely to that massive, beautiful, unconditionally warm presence. Pause. Your long season of endless midnight anxiety is officially coming to an end. Pause. Pause to fully, deeply comprehend the absolute magnitude of what is actually happening in your bedroom. You must deeply understand the current, active ministry of Jesus Christ. Pause. Many believers completely mistakenly assume that Jesus finished his entire massive job at the cross and is now simply passively sitting quietly in heaven. Pause. But the book of Hebrews explicitly completely destroys that theology. Pause. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25 powerfully declares, "Therefore he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them." I need you to loudly, carefully hear the staggering weight of that singular, massive sentence. Pause. He always lives to intercede. Pause. His current full-time, relentless, 24/7 occupation is actively praying for you. Pause. Intercession is not a passive activity. It requires deep, intense, absolute focus. Pause. To intercede effectively for someone, you must intimately, precisely know exactly what they are going through at that exact, precise biological moment. Pause. Therefore, the intercessory gaze is the literal, tangible, spiritual weight of Jesus Christ, completely focusing his absolute divine attention perfectly onto your massive, heavy life. Pause. When you suddenly woke up at 3 in the morning and explicitly, unmistakably felt eyes perfectly staring deeply at you, you were actively, physically intercepting the focused, highly loving gaze of the massive high priest standing strongly in the gap for your soul. Pause. He was standing silently near your bed, deeply engaged in passionate midnight prayer. Pause. Pause. The profound difference between a demonic spy and the massive good shepherd is the absolute, defining nature of the incredibly heavy gaze. Pause. A spy deeply, completely hides in the dark specifically because they have purely malicious, heavily toxic intentions. Pause. A spy desperately, aggressively seeks to remain absolutely, completely invisible. Pause. But the good shepherd does not hide. Pause. He simply stands quietly in the deep silence, affectionately watching his deeply exhausted sheep completely, radically, beautifully, violently rest. Pause. Have you ever watched your own precious child sleep? Pause. When you stand entirely quietly, perfectly quietly, in the doorway of your completely dark toddler's room, you are not staring at them to effectively terrorize them. Pause. You are staring at them because your massive heart is absolutely, utterly, completely overwhelmed with an incredibly pure, ferocious love. Pause. You are intimately, perfectly making sure they are entirely safe, entirely warm, and absolutely, completely, profoundly, deeply, perfectly, heavily protected. Pause. That specific, intense, completely protective affection produces a highly tangible atmosphere. Pause. The invisible eyes that you suddenly, explicitly, physically felt resting on your completely exhausted body belonged explicitly, entirely to Jesus. Pause. He was heavily, quietly, aggressively, powerfully standing watch. Pause. Your sensitive spirit explicitly picked up on the immense, heavy, tangible radiation of his profound, absolutely overwhelming, unyielding divine affection pouring strongly, fiercely over you. Pause. You woke up because the incredibly profound intensity of his massive pure love was simply too heavy for your physical body to ignore. Pause. Pause. But why exactly does he choose to watch over you while you are entirely unconscious? Pause. Why doesn't he just intercede for you during the day when you are officially awake? Pause. The profound answer lies inside your deep exhaustion. Pause. During the incredibly busy daylight hours, your mind is heavily, fiercely occupied. Pause. You are actively solving incredibly complex problems, fighting intensely draining spiritual battles, and faithfully executing your unique, demanding divine calling. Pause. You are brilliantly strong. Pause. But when you are beautifully, peacefully sound asleep, your heavy spiritual armor is completely, lovingly lowered. Pause. You are deeply, entirely vulnerable. Pause. That exquisite, totally absolute vulnerability is exactly what draws the massive protective gaze of the Good Shepherd. Pause. He is actively examining your exhausted mind, diagnosing the exact level of your psychological fatigue, and intimately praying for your complete supernatural restoration. Pause. He is watching the quiet rhythm of your breathing, making absolutely sure that your massive internal battery is being fully recharged for the impossible battles you must fight tomorrow. Pause. You did not wake up because the intense silence was deeply terrifying. You woke up because your spirit actively felt the warm, incredibly thick, restorative power of his intercession directly massaging your tired soul. Pause. The gaze is a deeply profound form of spiritual therapy, explicitly strictly designed to completely, quietly, silently, absolutely, effectively, aggressively heal you. Pause. He watches you so intensely because your incredibly deep rest is fiercely precious to him. Pause. Pause. It is absolutely essential that your highly sensitive spirit learns how to explicitly differentiate between a demonic monitoring spirit and the incredible intercessory gaze of the Good Shepherd. Pause. The mechanical action of watching is exactly the same, but the underlying deeply spiritual motive is entirely, infinitely opposite. Pause. When the enemy launches a highly classified surveillance operation against your destiny, he violently watches you specifically to meticulously record your fatal faults. Pause. A monitoring spirit aggressively stares at your heavy exhaustion, looking for a tiny crack in your faith so it can ruthlessly exploit your extreme vulnerability. Pause. The devil's gaze actively produces a harsh, chilling, deeply sterile atmosphere. Pause. It explicitly triggers your massive spiritual immune system, violently forcing your physical heart rate to suddenly spike aggressively because the heavy, toxic radiation of condemnation has directly breached your deeply private perimeter. Pause. The enemy entirely wants you to feel heavily scrutinized. Pause. He wants you to violently toss and intensely turn all night, perfectly agonizing over every single massive mistake you made during the entire long day. Pause. His dark gaze is intensely, relentlessly, critically demanding. Pause. It is explicitly designed to powerfully, forcibly, legally strip you of your precious, heavily guarded, profound absolute rest by filling your mind with pure dread. Pause. He aggressively stalks you in the quiet dark strictly because he completely, desperately hates the incredibly immense, beautiful, glorious, holy light you carry. Pause. Pause. But the Good Shepherd intensely watches you for an entirely opposite, profoundly beautiful reason. Pause. Jesus does not stand quietly by your peaceful bed to heavily critique your daily performance. Pause. He already intimately knows your deepest human vulnerabilities. Pause. He actively watches your heavy exhaustion precisely so that he can officially cover every single temporary weakness with his infinitely sufficient divine grace. Pause. When the shepherd explicitly locks his intensely warm, fully protective gaze directly upon you, The atmosphere does not chill. It incredibly rapidly thickens with absolute safety. Pause. His gaze does not violently demand performance. It powerfully, actively demands total surrender. Pause. The Lord actively looks at your deeply exhausted physical frame and fiercely commands the incredibly stressful, anxious spiritual realm to completely stand down. Pause. He is absolutely not there to harshly, angrily scrutinize you. He is standing there to passionately, safely shield you. Pause. There is absolutely no heavy condemnation in that intensely quiet, heavily guarded room. Pause. The profound warmth that you suddenly explicitly feel actively radiating across your sleeping body is the incredible, actual physical manifestation of pure divine acceptance. Pause. It is the overwhelming, intensely, deeply beautiful, explicitly comforting feeling of being totally, fully, completely, actively, uniquely, explicitly, intimately known. Unconditionally, fiercely, fiercely, incredibly, incredibly, explicitly, strictly, purely, highly, strictly, completely, undeniably, passionately, fiercely, beautifully loved, and completely safely protected by heaven. Pause. You are not an incredibly terrified victim of the night. You are the deeply cherished treasure of the King. Pause. Pause. I want you to think about how physically heavy that sudden, deeply peaceful atmosphere truly felt. Pause. It wasn't just a brief, fleeting emotional feeling. Pause. It felt like an actual, highly tangible weight had been carefully placed directly on top of your anxious chest. Pause. In the spiritual realm, extremely intense, deep intercession actually carries massive, substantial density. Pause. You essentially physically, explicitly felt the massive, heavy, supernatural, intensely, explicitly, completely, uniquely, explicitly, undeniably, powerfully, heavily, literally, physically, directly, explicitly, natively, definitively, physically, absolutely, actually, entirely, literally, deeply, absolutely, directly, absolutely, literally, actually, truly, physically felt the incredibly massive weight of his intensely protective mantle being specifically, explicitly, completely, absolutely, carefully, safely, completely, perfectly, gently, meticulously, safely, explicitly, lovingly, securely, directly, fiercely, directly, lovingly, safely, carefully, fully, lovingly, deeply, safely, fully, securely, gently, completely, meticulously, slowly, carefully, slowly, gently, draped entirely right across your heavy bed. Pause. When a powerful king completely officially places his heavy, royal, beautiful, massive, royal, heavy, explicitly heavy, strictly, heavily, deeply, explicitly, incredibly beautiful, heavy, highly thick, completely, highly, completely massive, richly, incredibly thick, uniquely, beautifully, fiercely, totally, entirely royal mantle over someone, he is heavily, fiercely, aggressively, intensely, loudly, fiercely, officially, heavily, forcefully, formally, furiously, fully, definitively, publicly, completely, officially, publicly, loudly, actively, definitively, fiercely, boldly, legally, publicly, aggressively, permanently, safely, powerfully, publicly declaring that the specific individual is under his direct, explicit, exclusive, absolute, total, absolute, full, unquestionable, massive personal protection. Pause. The heavy peace in that dark room was God actively wrapping you in safety. Pause. The scriptures give us an incredibly profound, high-definition picture of exactly what is transpiring in the unseen realm when you experience this peaceful awakening. Pause. Let us examine the staggering reality permanently recorded in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 34. Pause. The Apostle Paul emphatically declares, Christ Jesus who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. When we hear the phrase interceding at the right hand of God, our deeply religious conditioning often pictures Jesus sitting millions of miles away in the distant clouds, formally and politely asking God the Father to mildly bless our lives from afar. Pause. But that is incredibly poor, powerless theology. Pause. Because Jesus literally sent the absolute fullness of the Holy Spirit to securely, legally reside directly inside of you. His majestic throne room intercession is instantly, intimately broadcasted perfectly into the very atmosphere of your quiet bedroom. Pause. When Christ passionately speaks your specific name before the glorious throne of heaven, the massive spiritual shockwaves of that intercessory prayer immediately hit the physical earthly perimeter of your mattress. Pause. His intercession isn't a distant religious echo. It is an incredibly intimate, fiercely active, completely present spiritual transaction. Pause. The unmistakable gaze you felt was the actual, heavy, undeniable weight of his heavenly advocacy touching tightly down on earth. Pause. He is praying right there beside you. Pause. Pause. What does the active intercession of the living Christ actually look like when it enters your bedroom? Pause. It looks exactly like the thick, quiet atmosphere that just surrounded your body. Pause. Jesus is not aggressively shouting warrior prayers over you while you are trying to find deep rest. He is performing a highly surgical, therapeutic, divine intervention. Pause. The immense physical peace you are feeling is the absolute direct result of his powerful prayers, actively pushing back the intense anxiety of tomorrow. Pause. While your conscious human mind is completely powered down, his divine intercession is actively establishing a wide perimeter of absolute safety around your life. Pause. Have you ever nervously anticipated a very stressful conversation or a difficult financial deadline scheduled for the next morning? Pause. The enemy strongly desires that toxic stress to invade your dreams and completely ruin your sleep cycle. Pause. Therefore, the Good Shepherd intentionally stands directly between your sleeping body and the dark anxieties of the entirely unwritten future. Pause. His heavy, loving gaze literally acts as an invisible shield, filtering out the heavy pressure of the world. Pause. The warmth you feel is his prayer actively disarming the traps that the enemy carefully laid for you. Pause. He is dismantling the darkness so completely that all you can feel is the warm, steady, perfectly heavy heartbeat of pure, unadulterated divine grace. Pause. You are blanketed in his prayers. Pause to grasp the magnitude of this moment. You must realize the specific details of his prayer. Pause. Jesus does not pray generic blessings over your life. Pause. He intercedes for intricate details. Pause. While your physical frame rests in a state of absolute unconsciousness, the Lord himself is speaking over your calling, your marriage, and your financial breakthrough. Pause. Are you worried about a difficult decision you need to make tomorrow? Pause. Christ is spending the midnight hour asking the Father to grant you the precise wisdom required for that exact scenario. Pause. Are you currently battling a physical sickness that drains your energy during the day? Pause. The shepherd is standing by your bed, specifically asking heaven to release restorative healing into your weary bones while you sleep. Pause. Are you anxious about the profound spiritual warfare surrounding your children and your family legacy? Pause. The King of Kings is using his sovereign authority to dispatch warrior angels to guard the perimeter of their destinies. Pause. He prays for your finances. Pause. He prays for your massive calling. Pause. He prays for every single heavy burden that you carry. Pause. That dense, incredible warmth filling your bedroom is the tangible manifestation of his specific petitions being presented at the throne of grace. Pause. You did not wake up to fight. You woke up to feel the heavy weight of his divine advocacy. Pause. He is doing the heavy lifting while you are entirely allowed to rest. Pause. Pause. To further fully comprehend the incredible nature of this divine surveillance, we only have to look at the incredibly beautiful, highly poetic imagery found directly in the Song of Solomon. Pause. Chapter 2, verse 9 gives us a breathtaking picture of how the Lord affectionately watches his beloved. Pause. It says, "Look, pause. There he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice." This is exactly what your spirit explicitly felt in the middle of the night. Pause. It wasn't the harsh, terrifying glare of a demonic intruder looking for a point of entry. It was the incredibly tender, intensely affectionate gaze of the ultimate lover of your soul peering quietly into your intimate space. Pause. He stands behind the wall of your physical bedroom and gazes through the lattice of the spiritual realm. Pause. He is not watching to coldly judge you. Pause. He is watching simply because he absolutely delights in you. Pause. When you suddenly woke up feeling the distinct pressure of unseen eyes staring at you in the dark, you were actually experiencing the exact biblical reality of Song of Solomon chapter 2. Pause. You were uniquely feeling the passionate, deeply protective, and profoundly romantic attention of the bridegroom actively watching over his fiercely cherished bride. Pause. The mysterious eyes in the dark were undeniably holy. Pause. He was pouring his affection over you exactly when you were too tired to perform, proving that his massive love is entirely unconditional. Pause. Sigh. Pause. This incredible experience is also perfectly authenticated in Psalm 139. Pause. David writes, "How precious to me are your thoughts, God." Pause. "How vast is the sum of them." Pause. "Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you." David clearly understood the immense spiritual weight of waking up in the direct presence of God. Pause. When David abruptly opened his eyes after deep sleep, he immediately felt the massive density of God's precious thoughts surrounding him. Pause. Notice that David didn't wake up feeling critically monitored or spiritually terrorized. Pause. He woke up feeling aggressively, beautifully loved. Pause. When you physically woke up at 3 in the morning and explicitly felt that incredibly thick, warm presence in the room, it was because the sum of God's incredibly precious thoughts completely overwhelmed your physical rest. Pause. You did not abruptly open your eyes because a spiritual battle was violently raging around your bed. Pause. You abruptly opened your eyes simply because the sheer volume of God's affectionate attention actually physically stirred your slumber. Pause. The Holy Spirit's presence was so magnificently comforting, so powerfully peaceful, and so densely concentrated in that localized space that your sleeping body absolutely had to wake up to physically acknowledge it. Pause. Your spirit essentially tapped you lightly on the shoulder and said, "Wake up and feel how much you are fiercely loved." Pause. Pause. This requires a massive, immediate shift in how you personally process the midnight hour moving forward. Pause. For years, you have been strictly conditioned to believe that whenever your spirit violently sounds the alarm at 3 a.m., it means you have to instantly jump out of bed, march aggressively around the room, and fiercely fight demons until dawn. Pause. But what if God is trying to gently teach you a profoundly different spiritual rhythm? Pause. What if he is desperately trying to show you that not every single supernatural encounter requires a sword? Pause. In that highly specific midnight moment, you absolutely did not wake up to fight. Pause. You explicitly woke up because the pure, unadulterated love in the room was so incredibly dense, so heavily concentrated, that it essentially became a localized atmospheric pressure. Pause. God wanted your conscious mind to briefly formally register the absolute safety of the intercessory gaze. Pause. He wanted you to explicitly feel the heavy divine blanket being pulled securely over your shoulders. Pause. The absolute last thing he wanted you to do was immediately panic and violently ruin the incredibly beautiful moment by aggressively searching the dark corners for an earthly enemy. Pause. The presence you felt was entirely, fundamentally designed to completely sedate your fierce anxiety, not to artificially trigger it. Pause. He woke you up strictly so you could experience the overwhelming, breathtaking luxury of being flawlessly guarded by the Good Shepherd. Pause. Pause. It is absolutely crucial that you experience a massive identity shift right now regarding the heavy burdens you carry. Pause. Many chosen ones suffer from an unspoken, deeply profound, spiritual orphan syndrome. Pause. Because you are constantly fighting on the absolute front lines for your family and your ministry, you have subconsciously convinced yourself that you are an entirely abandoned soldier. Pause. You believe that if you do not stay aggressively awake all night, actively guarding the perimeter, everything will violently collapse. Pause. The enemy loves feeding you this toxic lie. Pause. He wants you to believe that God's protection is fundamentally fragile, heavily conditional, and completely dependent on your frantic ability to pray without ever stopping to sleep. Pause. But that exhausting theology completely ignores the active ministry of Jesus. Pause. You are not a solitary security guard permanently stationed at the gates of your own life. Pause. When the intercessory gaze rests upon your bedroom, it is heaven explicitly reminding you that you have a massive, incredibly capable defender securely stationed above you. Pause. You do not have to hold the entire world together with your exhausted bare hands. Pause. The absolute second your physical eyes close, the Good Shepherd aggressively completely takes over the entire night shift. Pause. Your profound sleep does not actively physically weaken your spiritual defenses. It officially, dramatically, legally, completely activates His divine intercession. Pause. You are heavily guarded by His grace. Pause. Pause. You must powerfully transition your primary identity from being a heavily exhausted soldier to being the fiercely cherished bride of Christ. Pause. A soldier sleeps lightly in the trenches, anxiously clutching their weapon, terrified of a sudden midnight ambush. Pause. But a highly cherished bride sleeps incredibly deeply, completely secure in the absolute knowledge that her glorious king is heavily guarding the palace door. Pause. When you woke up and literally felt that massive, warm presence staring at you in the dark, heaven was giving you a brilliant, tangible demonstration of this beautiful protective reality. Pause. Heaven's highest, most violent battles are already being fought and massively won for you while you completely rest. Trust. The profound truth is that your divine covering absolutely does not end the second you fall asleep. Your sleep actually officially transfers the entire heavy burden of defense directly over to the Lord. Pause. The intercessory gaze proves that the Good Shepherd never clocks out. Pause. He actively holds the massive spiritual line so your physical body can rapidly, completely, brilliantly, effectively, efficiently heal. Pause. Your absolute safety does not depend on your ability to continuously stay awake. It depends entirely on His infallible ability to never sleep. Pause. You can completely, firmly, radically, actively, peacefully, beautifully, deeply, wonderfully, efficiently, gracefully, permanently, deeply, gracefully, fully, safely, successfully, confidently, completely surrender. Pause. You are heavily guarded by His perfect love. Pause. Pause. This leads to an incredibly profound, emotionally shattering realization. God actually deeply loves watching you sleep. Pause. We often view God strictly as a heavily demanding boss who only pays attention to us when we are aggressively working, actively praying, or forcefully accomplishing major earthly tasks. Pause. But that is entirely inaccurate. Pause. The deep, heavy affection of the Lord is absolutely not performance-based. Pause. When you were laying there perfectly still in the dark, unable to speak a single powerful prayer or execute a single strategic move, His massive attention was still entirely, intimately riveted upon you. Pause. He wasn't explicitly angrily glaring at you because you were failing to be spiritually productive. He was staring at you simply because you incredibly, profoundly, beautifully belong to Him. Pause. Have you genuinely allowed yourself to officially receive that specific, massive level of absolute divine validation? Pause. The heavy presence in the room is heaven's ultimate endorsement of your rest. Pause. It is God aggressively proving that you do not have to furiously earn His protective gaze. Pause. He watches over your exhausted frame specifically because he values your absolute restoration just as much as he explicitly values your active anointing. Pause. Being entirely loved while you sleep is the ultimate, massive, undeniable proof of his profound grace. Pause. He absolutely unconditionally treasures your quiet peace just as much as your loud victories. Pause. Pause, because you now definitively know exactly who is actively standing near your bed. You can fully and completely surrender your absolute midnight anxiety. Pause. The massive, undeniable Good Shepherd is officially permanently on duty. Pause. You no longer have to desperately fight the unseen spiritual shadows entirely alone. Pause. The next time you suddenly wake up in the pitch black and feel that incredibly heavy, deeply warm sensation of eyes securely locked directly onto you, I want you to remember this massive paradigm shift. Pause. Do not aggressively panic. Pause. Do not instantly jump out of your heavy blankets searching the dark corners for a demonic spy. Pause. Your spirit is accurately, explicitly confirming the incredibly dense, profound presence of the living Lord. Pause. Your bed is legally wrapped in the heavy, flawless spiritual weight of his divine intercession. Pause. The kingdom of darkness absolutely cannot forcefully penetrate the thick, brilliant atmosphere of divine grace currently guarding your deeply exhausted body. Pause. You are actively stepping into a magnificent realm of profound spiritual security where the immense power of God's heavy love perfectly, entirely dictates your rest. Pause. You can confidently close your physical eyes completely, knowing that the absolute creator of the universe is passionately, aggressively holding the massive spiritual line, actively defending your bedroom, so you can just sleep securely, safely. Pause. He watches entirely so that you never officially have to violently stay awake. Pause. Pause. So, exactly how should you respond the next time you wake up at 3 in the morning and feel that incredibly unmistakable, distinctly heavy presence explicitly watching you in the dark? Pause. It requires a radical departure from everything you have previously learned about midnight encounters. Pause. Your very first instruction is highly specific. Absolutely do not aggressively grab your phone. Pause. Do not violently flood your quiet physical environment with artificial blue light, desperately trying to distract your anxious mind. Pause. Your second crucial instruction is equally vital. Do not instantly start nervously praying loud, hyper-aggressive warfare prayers against random demons. Pause. If you actively jump out of bed and start violently rebuking shadows, you will entirely ruin the incredibly beautiful, incredibly restorative divine atmosphere that the Lord just heavily, meticulously established in your room. Pause. Instead of instantly preparing for massive combat, I want you to practice the profound weapon of absolute stillness. Pause. Close your eyes. Pause. Take a deep, incredibly slow physical breath, actively inhaling the thick, beautifully peaceful air. Pause. Simply and quietly whisper out loud, "Thank you, Lord." Pause. I officially receive your loving intercession. Pause. I know that you are actively fighting for my future right now, and I fully trust your absolute protection. That simple, incredibly quiet declaration perfectly aligns your exhausted human spirit directly with the massive intercessory gaze of heaven. Pause. You are explicitly telling the Good Shepherd that you fully recognize his holy presence and that you completely willingly accept the heavy, beautiful covering of his grace. Pause. It is the ultimate act of profound spiritual maturity to realize that sometimes the most powerful spiritual warfare you can possibly execute is deliberately choosing to peacefully stay in bed. Pause. Pause. If this massive revelation just finally lifted an incredible burden of nocturnal anxiety directly off your chest, I urgently need you to actively take action right now. Pause. There are absolutely thousands of other deeply exhausted chosen ones who are terrified of their own bedrooms. Pause. They are painfully, chronically sleep deprived exactly because they mistakenly believe that every single midnight awakening represents a terrifying demonic invasion. Pause. They deeply and desperately require this exact comforting truth. Pause. I want you to share this specific video with them immediately. Pause. Your simple recommendation possesses the explosive spiritual power to officially liberate a fellow warrior from a lifetime of nocturnal paranoia. Pause. Drop a powerful comment below to let me know the exact moment you finally realized the thick presence in your room was actually the Good Shepherd fiercely praying over your destiny. Pause, and make absolutely sure you loudly strike that subscribe button and successfully ring the notification bell before you leave. Pause. We are fiercely, entirely dedicated to completely decoding the massive mysteries of the Chosen One journey, and you absolutely cannot afford to miss the next major tactical briefing. Pause. Never, ever forget this vital, beautifully profound truth. The heavy, creeping sensation in the dark is not always an invasion. Pause. Often, it is the ultimate proof of heaven's incredibly flawless protection. Pause. Stop aggressively, fiercely searching the deep corners for a demonic spy. Boldly, confidently, absolutely lay your beautifully exhausted head completely back down on your pillow and violently, effectively, securely rest in the heavy, warm blanket of His intercessory love. Pause. God bless you, warrior, and I will officially see you in the exact next incredibly profound video. Pause. Sleep securely under His eternal gaze. Pause. Pause.